anyway, and
Okay.
see what happens anyway. Thank
All right.
you.
So, not seeing me may be an advantage, I guess, but not seeing the text is a bit of a problem. This is very a text-based share this morning, but everything will be explained. So hopefully, you'll get the general drift of what's going on. It's like sometimes, I've been over the years to meetings of the Conference of European Rabbis, which happens in various parts of Europe, and all the proceedings are in Ivrit. And I can cope with some of it, but when people speak quickly, you get lost. But very often, all the drushes are they quote verses from Tanakh and this. So sometimes you can kind of join the dots and get the general drift of what's going on. So hopefully, those of you who are listening to this remotely will still get something from this. Anyway, the topic I've taken for this morning, it's a bit random. It's not connected to the sutra or anything else that I've been learning recently, but it's based on an essay by Rav Zalman Nechemia Goldberg, Zichron Livracha, I think was one of the Dayanim in the Jerusalem Bezdin, and it's on the topic of the obligation of men and particularly women in Birchas Hamazon of benching. So the starting point, of course, is the verse, which in any case is quoted in the benching, which says, "V'yochalta b'savota uve'yirachta es Hashem Elokecha al ha'oretz atov asher nasalach." They shall eat and be satisfied and bless the Lord your God, obviously for the food that we've been eating, but specifically al ha'oretz atov, for the good land which He has given to you. And the obviously when we're living on the land of Israel, so the food is primarily coming from there, and that's regarded as one of the great blessings that the Jewish people received, and this is the source for benching. So the obligation to bench, to say Birchas Hamazon, is one of the two blessings which we're obligated min haTorah to say. This one is self-evident from the verse that we've seen, but also Birchas haTorah, Asher b'chabanu mikol ha'amim, and so on. That's also min haTorah. All other blessings that we recite, Birchas mitzvos or Birchas nelim, all these things were instituted by Chazal, Chachamim, and there's a logic that just as one should bless Hashem for the food that we eat, so we should also bless Hashem on other occasions where we're involved in some religious obligation. But so therefore, I'm personally very particular. If on occasion when I get an Aliyah Torah, I'll say that bracha with carefully and with special kavanah, and very often you see people going up to, and they feel that they're it's almost like showing off how quickly they can prattle those words off and show that they're proficient in reciting it, but actually they're maybe not doing the bracha as due justice. Now the point that I'm going to bring out here is as follows. So the second source, for those of you that have actually got sight of the sheet, so the Gemara in Brachos, Daf Mentes says like this: V'chol she'einu omer bris v'torah b'birchas ha'oretz u'malchus beis David b'boni Yerushalayim lo yotzi deichu v'aseh. What does that mean? That if you didn't say the words for the bris that you have sealed in our flesh, or you don't say and for your Torah which you have taught us, in the bracha of Birchas ha'oretz, that's Hamazon that we say in benching, if you left out those words, or if you didn't say about Malchus Beis David in the bracha of Bnei Yerushalayim, you haven't fulfilled your obligation. Messiah Leila Rabbi Eliah, and support for this is brought from Rabbi Elad to Omer Rabbi Elad. He said, Omer Rabbi Yaakov bar Acham Mishum Rabbeinu. This is the chain of tradition where this came from. Kol shelo Omer Beris v'Torah b'Birchas ha'Oretz. Whoever doesn't say these words in Birchas ha'Oretz, Umalchus Beis David b'Boni Yerushalayim, lo yotzei decha, so they haven't fulfilled their obligation. So the and the Shulchan Aruch in the next source says as follows: Lo hizkir birchas ha'Oretz bris v'Torah. Right, if you didn't mention these phrases, or these clauses in Birchas ha'Oretz, even if you only omitted one of them, right? Machzirin, so you send him back to the beginning. The person's got to say the whole of benching again. Says the Ramah, beautifully highlighted in blue here for those that aren't colorblind. It says, "V'noshim v'avodim lo yomru bis v'tera." When women are benching, says the Ramah, they don't say "Ve'avrisacha shechasamta b'sorenu," because the noshim love b'nei brisninu. We don't practice female circumcision, so women don't get to say "Ve'avrisacha shechasamta b'sorenu." This is the ruling of the Ramah, and likewise with avodim, we're talking about Jewish avodim. They're not obligated in Birchas Torah in the same way that the women in the chiyuv of learning Torah, in the same way that women do not have the same obligation as men when it comes to learning. So we have this interesting conundrum here. On the one hand, the Shulchan Aruch, and based on the Gemara, is saying if you don't say you haven't fulfilled your obligation in benching, and yet with the Ramah rules that women don't say because they don't have a bris milah. So a bit of a conundrum here as to whether then women, what their obligation is, and is their obligation a Torah obligation? So I'll ask you, generally, what sort of situations are there where women don't have a biblical obligation? Pardon? All right. Yeah, correct. So for those positive mitzvahs which have to be performed at a specific time, women are exempt. There are a number of exceptions, but basically that's the general rule. Now, Birchas Hamazon is a mitzvah saying it's a positive commandment, but does it have to be said at a specific time? No, it's not restricted, like you only say it at night time or daytime or on Shabbos or something like that. You have an obligation to bench whenever you have a meal. So now we go into the Mishnah Berurah, the next source. So on the comment of the Shulchan Aruch, so he says Sha'al yedei bris nosna nitnat ha'oretz la'Avraham b'parshas Milah, because our right to a claim in Eretz Yisrael was announced or given to Avraham Avinu at the time that he had the bris milah, Shnema, as it said, that I've given this land to you for you and your seed after you, the land of your sojourning, where the future Jewish people are going to reside, and also the Torah mitzvahs, and also it's in the merit of the Torah that we learn and the mitzvahs that we observed, Yorshu es Oretz, that was our entitlement to inherit and to possess the land. Shanema, as it is said, another pasuk, Lama'an tichyun urevisem Uvosem v'rishtem es ha'oretz, that in order that you shall live and you multiply and you'll come to possess the land, but then it qualifies it for Omer, and it says, "V'yitein lohem arotzos goyim," and God will give you the lands belonging to the goyim because we dispossessed all the Canaanite tribes that were living there. But it adds, but avur, in order that, well, condition that rather, so that yishmeru chukav mishpatorosov, that you have to observe his statutes and his laws. So the entitlement to Eretz Israel is fundamentally dependent on the observance of laws and statutes, which is why, of course, there's one of the many reasons why there is tension between the religious factions in Eretz Israel and the secular ones. The secular regard Israel as a place that is a refuge for Jews to live, irrespective of without conditions, right? But the Torah community say, no, our right to live here is contingent on us learning Torah and keeping the mitzvahs. Okay, so I come on to the next passage, also from the Seches Brachos, Daf Chav. Ravina said to Rava, Noshim bebirchas hamazon, with the idea of women being obligated in saying benching, D'oraisa d'Rabbanan. Ask the question: is this a Torah obligation or is it a d'Rabbanan obligation? L'may nafkamina. So the Gemara asked her, what practical difference arises from knowing whether you have to say something midoraisa or midrabbanan? So the Gemara tells us that afuke Rabbi midei chavason. This is to do with whether women would have the authority to be motzi other people, to fulfill their obligation. Just as one person says Kiddush, you come to Kiddush on Shabbos morning, one person says the Kiddush, but everybody listening to that Kiddush and saying Amen, they're now entitled to eat because it's as if they said the Kiddush themselves. But only works if you're on the same level of obligation. So if you'll say very well that their obligation in Birkas Hamazon is min ha-Torah, just like men, so Osti Deraisa, Mafik Deraisa, so somebody who's got a Torah obligation can recite the Birkas Hamazon for somebody else who has a Torah obligation and be motzi them. V'i omrat derabbanan. But if you'll say that a woman's obligation in benching is only rabbinic in origin, then then we'll say that it's like that they're not really mechiyav, they're not really obligated in the same way in this matter. If you're not obligated min ha-Torah, you can't bench on behalf of other people who have a Torah obligation.
Also, with a mezuzah, you can't include a woman from mezuzah.
No, but they can have their own mezuzah.
Their own.
They can make their own mezuzah because they're equivalent thing, right? Yeah. It's certainly more than that, but that's one of the reasons. So what's the din here? So Toshima. So come and hear. Be'emes omru. In truth, they said. Now, this phrase, be'emes omru, often appears in a Mishnah when the rabbis say be'emes omru. That's the halacha. That's our tradition. Ben mavorech la'aviv. A son can bench for his father. Ve'eved mavorech la'rabo. A servant can bench for his master. Ve'isha mavoreches la'bayla. And a woman can bench for her husband. So that all seems to imply that their obligation is actually min ha-Torah. Aval, Amr Chachamim. However, the sages said as follows: Tavo ma'era la'odom she'ishto uvonov mevorachim lo. It's embarrassing. It's an embarrassment for a man if he is unable to say the words himself, and he relies on his wife or his children to bench for him. So Imro, pardon?
Women's liberation.
Yeah. Well, don't get me on that topic. So, so if you say that a woman's obligation in benching is minatera, that works fine. Osid deraisa, mafik deraisa. If she's got a Torah obligation and her husband has a Torah obligation, so she can bench for him. But according to those who argue that a woman's obligation in benching would only be rabbinic, Osi derabbanan, mafik deraisa, the same question arises: can a person whose obligation in a mitzvah is only midrabbanan, therefore act as a shlich, as it were, for somebody whose obligation is deraisa? So so it's left a little bit of an open question there, but we have to bear in mind that if on the one hand we're saying, come back to the original question, if on the one hand you're saying that if a person doesn't say esbarisuka shechasamta b'sorenu, that if you didn't say those words when you're benching, you haven't fulfilled your obligation, and the Shulchan Aruch rules that women don't say those words because they don't have a bris milah. So how can it be that they can fulfill their husband's obligation in benching? So that's the sort of one of the conundrum. So Rav Nechemia Goldberg addresses this point, and he comes to it from a different angle altogether. So I want to explain the sources now that are in the box, the virtual box for those that are online here. So in the box we have the following thing. Now, as you all know, there's a biblical obligation to give tithes. Right, in Eretz Israel, if you grow produce, you first had to take teruma gedola, which went to the Kohen, had to be given to the Kohen, and then you took a Ma'aser Rishon, which a tenth of your produce, which is given to the Levi. But the Levi in turn also has to take truma from his ma'aser, and he gives that to the Kohen. So the way the verse expresses this is as follows. This is addressed to the Leviim. It's called Trumas Ma'aser. Ma'aser Sheni, you're given the third and the sixth year, take to Yerushalayim and eat in Yerushalayim. It's different Ma'aser, okay? Okay. The other years you take Ma'aser on in, it's given to the poor. But we're talking about every year. There's Truma and Ma'aser Rishon, which goes to the Levi, but he in turn has to take Truma's Ma'aser and give it to the Kohen. So says the Torah, Kain Taruma Gam Atem Terumas Hashem. So you Levim, you've also got to take Truma, Mikol Ma'aser Sechem, from all of the Ma'aser Rishon that you get from the plebs, from the rest of the people not Kohanim Levim, right? You get your Ma'aser, right? You have to take Truma, which you have in turn have taken from the rest of the other tribes of Israel. And you will take from that, or give from that, Truma, again, this goes to Aharon, the Kohen, and by extension to the other Kohanim in subsequent generations. So the Gemara in this time in Bava Metzia is interested in this phrase Gam Atem. It didn't need to say that. You get your Ma'aser, and you also have to give take from that Truma to give to the Kohanim. So the Gemara in Bava Metzia says like this: Ravashi said, Ki Omrin Shlichus L'Nochri, where we said that a din of shlichus. So let's just explain what shlichus is. I think you probably are familiar with this, but there's a principle of agency that applies in throughout most of Jewish practice, namely that if you say to a person, "I want you to act on my behalf as a proxy and do something for me," and for example, one of the classic cases is giving kiddushin to a woman. to become betrothed to a woman. So normally what happens is, you go to a woman, you give her something of value, such as the ring, put the ring on her finger in the presence of two witnesses and say, hurry up, Mukadeshesli, right? But you'll be betrothed to me with this ring. If this is done in front of two kosher witnesses, she becomes betrothed to this man. But if the man says to his friend Moshe, I want you to go to Birmingham and go to such and such an address, and there's this lady lives there, I want to take this ring, and on my behalf, and in the presence of two kosher witnesses, I want you to put the ring on her finger and say these words. The moment he does that, this woman now becomes betrothed to the man here in London. Okay, how does it work? It's shlichus, because we say shlucho shel adam, a person shaliach is kamosa, is like himself. It's like an extension of his own hand. And this works in many, many situations. So the Gemara here presumes here that when we say that you can't make a non-Jew your shaliach, so he says, Hane mili b'truma. That applies where it's to do with taking truma, to send somebody into your field, non-Jewish worker, and say, take a certain amount of the produce and give it to the Kohen on my behalf. He says, that doesn't work. So Rav Ashi, that doesn't work for a non-Jew. But he holds that as far as the rest of Torah is concerned, yesh shlichus lanochi. There is such a concept of appointing a non-Jew to be your shaliach. V'ho the Rav Ashi berusahi, but the Gemara rejects this. Rav Ashi's opinion is kind of rejected here. So, but my shana terumatelo. But why does Rav Ashi hold that? Then it comes to the din of teruma, he makes an exception and says that a non-Jew cannot take teruma for you and give it to the Kohen. Dichsiv, because it says in this, it says atem, you, but it says gam atem, the highlighted words. The word gam is included there, right, which isn't really necessary. So so the Gemara's limud, for understanding is like this: Ma'atem b'nei bris. Just as you are all b'nei bris, you are all Jewish people. You talking about the Leviim who are going to give this truma to the Kohanim. Just as you are b'nei bris, af shaluchachem nami b'nei bris. So if anybody that you appoint to be a shaliach for you must also be a Jewish person. And shalichus techala Torah kula nami mitruma gemrina. And this principle of shalichus, as it applies throughout other aspects of Torah, we learn from the paradigm of truma. So Rav Ashi's position is rejected. We don't make non-Jews our shlich. A shlich has to be a b'nei bris. So now coming back into the 20th century now, the Torah Tamima, there's Rabbi Epstein, who was the of based in Novodok, wherever that is. Is that Poland or? No, we're coming to them. Just getting through the film. That's it. Okay. Are we going to get thrown out here? Okay.
Camera goes off.
So he says like this. Well, yeah. V'das, he says like this: Shekos v'atos brachos davchov b'tam adova shepturas noshim mibirchas hamoz min haTorah. So the Tosfos argue that women are exempt min haTorah from benching is mishum de lo motzu because they can't say bris v'Torah. They can't say bal bris l'shechsanta b'Yisraeli. You know, they don't have a bris milah. Lefi she'enam lo b'sev lo b'sev. It practically doesn't apply to them. They can't practice bris milah, and they don't have an obligation to learn Torah min haTorah. V'hinei, however, he says, lefi zeh tzorich lemer if you say, if you by extension, if you apply that principle, it's like saying that women are not part of the Jewish people. Gamle in shlichus, when it comes, for example, for this din of agency.
I don't know whether you say it, but a woman has an obligation to bris her child. If that one, like Sephora with Moshe,
Yeah, so 100%. Let me finish the sentence. Ava emes ein adava kain. But in truth, this can't be right, says the Torah Tamima. The kan hapirush b'nei bris humiloshon keshva gudim hakadosh baruch hu mitzvosov. The expression of b'nei bris that this Gemara is that we just saw in above says is talking about. It doesn't mean you're a person that has a bris milah. It means you're a person who has a connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his mitzvahs. For sure, women are included in this. He says, I can bring you an explicit quote from the Torah, say in Parshas Nitzavim, Atem Nitzavim Hayom Kulachem. Moshe Rabbeinu is in his final address to the Jewish people. You're all standing here today. Tapachem, the Shechem includes your children and your women, etc., etc. La'avracha b'bris Hashem, who are included in all the obligations in the covenant that they make with Hashem. V'rak b'birchas hamazon shani. The only thing is that when it comes to birchas hamazon, there's a difference. So he says because they can't really say, or at least this is how some interpret this. They can't say, "We thank you, Hashem, for the bris which you have sealed in our flesh," because they don't have a bris. Also, you can explain here what happens if you got a Jewish man that never had a bris milah. Shalom Molma he didn't have it for some reason. Two older brothers that were born died after bris milah. Maybe they had a hemophiliac or something in those days. There's some other kind of physical weakness. Nevertheless, Ben Bris in the shlichus, but this person who never had a bris, he can act as a shliach. He's a Jewish man. He can act as a shliach like any other Jewish person. Because even if he hasn't had a bris milah, but he still has an attachment to the Jewish people and the Hashem's Torah. So the Mishnah Berurah rules finally here. So this is a Mishnah Berurah on the Shulchan Aruch that says that whether Ramah says the women don't say bris for Torah when they're benching. So he says, Mikomokim biomenu in our days, again, it's 20th century, that women do, when they're benching, do say all these words, don't leave anything out. This is, they're referring not to as it applies to themselves, as it applies to the menfolk in the Jewish people, because as we saw earlier, through the merit of learning Torah and observing the mitzvahs, including the bris, that the Jewish people inherited the land of Israel. And the Mishnah Berurah adds the certain parts of learning which women are obligated, because they have to know about the mitzvahs that are specific to them, later in order that they know how to perform them. So at the end of the day, it's if the argument was that women might only be obligated midrabanan because they have to miss out certain words. Well, we're not. The law, the din now is they're not missing out any of those words, and there is there's still justification for including them, even midoraisa, because they are part of the Jewish people, and that is a more overarching bris that we have with the Almighty than the specific one of bris milah. So it's a little bit of a slightly abstruse topic, but I hope it's a bit of learning, and it's something to understand, in regards to. Benching.
Thank you very much.
Chuck us out now. Okay.
Yeah, I'll say goodbye to those on Zoom. Hopefully I'll get the camera working next week.